Emperor of France, conqueror of Europe, and arguably the greatest military leader in history, Napoleon Bonaparte will be remembered throughout the ages for his tactical genius, military prowess, and uncompromising will. Born on August 15th, 1769, on the French island of Corsica, to members of the minor nobility, Napoleon spent most of his childhood on the French mainland, where he attended the Military College of Brienne before graduating onto the Military Academy in Paris. After graduating in 1785 as a second lieutenant, he promptly joined the French artillery, where he avidly studied the artillery tactics that would serve him well throughout his career. During the 1793 Reign of Terror in France, Napoleon became associated with the Robespierre brothers, who were a major driving force behind the outbursts of violence. By now he had climbed the military ladder to the rank of brigadier general, but upon the execution of the brothers in 1794 for their treachery, Napoleon was briefly placed under house arrest before being released back to the army a short while later. This blip didn't seem to halt his progression, and after his release he aided the suppression of a royalist coup against the French revolutionary government and was later promoted to the rank of Major General in 1795. 1 year later he was finally given the opportunity to show his true military potential, as he was given command of the French army in Italy and tasked with defeating their long-standing enemy, the Austrian Empire. After scoring several victories against his numerically superior enemy and gaining valuable territorial gains for France, Napoleon launched the invasion of Egypt in an attempt to wipe out the trade routes of France's long-standing enemy, the British. A sensational victory against the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids in July 1798 was swiftly followed by a devastating loss by his naval forces at the hands of the Royal Navy at the Battle of the Nile in August of that year, which left his army stranded. Another failed campaign was soon to follow in early 1799, as Napoleon led an invasion of the Ottoman Empire. Unable to win a decisive victory at Acre, the ever-ambitious Napoleon abandoned his army and returned to France, where he took part in the coup d'etat in November, which successfully overthrew the French Directory and replaced it with a 3-member consulate, of which Napoleon made sure he was one. Now, as France's leading political figure, Napoleon returned to his army and once again took up arms against the Austrians in Italy. With a stunning victory at the Battle of Marengo in June 1800, the French drove the Austrians out of Italy once and for all, further enhancing Napoleon's reputation and cementing his position as first consul of France. To restore stability to post-revolutionary France, Napoleon instituted the Napoleonic Code on 21st of March 1804, which streamlined the French legal system, parts of which are still in use across the globe to this day. However, behind the scenes he made a constitutional amendment making himself consul for life before he finally crowned himself Emperor of France at a ceremony in Notre Dame Cathedral in 1804. Napoleon by this time was married to Josephine de Beauharnais. However, as she could not give Napoleon any offspring, in 1809 Napoleon had their marriage annulled and later married Marie-Louise in 1810, whom he had a son with in 1811, who was aptly named Napoleon II and given the title of King of Rome. From 1803 to 1815, Europe was plunged into the Napoleonic Wars, which would see Napoleon's legend rise to unfathomable heights. With the British Royal Navy once again destroying the French fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805, Napoleon's armies were confined to conquering mainland Europe. At the Battle of Austerlitz in December of that year, Napoleon pulled off one of his greatest victories by defeating the combined armies of Austria and Russia, which resulted in the complete dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and brought about the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine. However, unable to invade Britain without a navy, in 1806 Napoleon sought to wage economic warfare against the British, with the creation of the continental system of Europe, which encouraged the blockading of British trade from European ports. But in 1810, Russia withdrew from the system, and in his rage, Napoleon gathered his Grand Army and launched a massive invasion into Russia in the summer of 1812. An indecisive battle at Borodino in September of that year led Napoleon to chase the Russians deeper and deeper into the country, until his army finally captured the abandoned Russian capital of Moscow. Expecting a note of surrender from the Russians, Napoleon and his army waited in the abandoned city for a month. However, no note ever came. Instead, Russian mercenaries set fire to the city, depriving the Grand Army of its supplies, and with the bitter Russian winter setting in, Napoleon decided to retreat to France. The disastrous retreat through the snow resulted in less than a quarter of the Grand Army surviving the campaign. At the same time, Napoleon was faced with more bad news, as the French forces in Spain and Portugal were defeated in the Peninsular War, and with one final loss at the Battle of Leipzig, Napoleon, who was surrounded by coalition forces in Paris, abdicated the throne on April 6, 1814, and went into exile on the Mediterranean island of Elba. Now it would seem that the story of Napoleon would end here, with his honourable exile. But in one of the greatest gambles in history, Napoleon escaped from Elba with 1,000 men of his old guard, and less than 1 year after his abdication on February 26, 1815, he landed back on the French mainland. With the French people loathing their new royalist rule, Napoleon quickly regained the love of the French people, and on March 20th King Louis XVIII fled Paris. Without even firing a single shot, Napoleon was now back on the throne as Emperor of France. Stunned, the old coalition of Austria, Britain, Prussia and Russia quickly assembled their armies and prepared for war. Realizing he did not have the strength to fight a combined force, Napoleon sought to defeat each army one by one, so in June 1815 he invaded Belgium, defeating the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny on June 16th. However, on June 18th, at the Battle of Waterloo, a combined force of British and Prussians narrowly defeated Napoleon's army, and for a second time on June 22nd, 1815, he was forced to abdicate and sent into exile on the British-held island of St. Helena. 6 years later, on May 5th, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at the age of 51. In 1840, his remains were returned to Paris and entombed at Les Invalides, the resting place of many of France's greatest military leaders. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on Napoleon. Was he a tyrant, a visionary, or a mixture of both?